It's been a long road, getting from there to here. It's been a long time, but our time is finally here, dang it! Hello interwebs, and welcome to my continuing series where I rank the top 10 episodes of every single Star Trek show, and of course, this week we are ranking Star Trek Enterprise. As many of you know, Star Trek Enterprise is probably my favorite Star Trek show, not because I think it's the best. I would probably give that to Deep Space Nine or even Lower Decks or even maybe even Strange New Worlds at this point. But I particularly love this show because I think it epitomizes everything that I love and enjoy and find weird and even hate about Star Trek. Like, in 4 seasons of a show, this just captures all the weird idiosyncrasies, all the heights, all the lows, all the things that I desperately hate, all about Star Trek. So again, is this the best Star Trek series of all time? No, certainly not, but it's one that I have a particular fondness for, not the least of which because I have a certain nostalgia for it, considering it was the first Star Trek show that I got to watch week to week growing up. Like, I just love this show. That being said though, for those of you who are new to this sort of video series that I'm doing here, what I'm doing is, like I said, ranking the top 10 episodes of every Star Trek show, to eventually, at the end of this series, I'm going to be ranking the top 20 episodes of Star Trek in general. So I'm sure that that's not going to get contentious at all, so go check out my other videos in this series that I've already done, as well as the ones that are coming up for modern Star Trek, and then the top 20 episodes of Star Trek overall. So we're going to use the list that we create here to make that last list. But getting into this list specifically, this was actually probably the Star Trek show that was easiest for me to rank the top 10 of. Mostly because, again, I have a particular fondness for this, so I already knew which episodes that I already kind of loved and had a subjective taste for. But also, like I said, also as well, Star Trek Enterprise has a lot of varying quality, and there are certain episodes of the show that are just clear head and shoulders above the rest in terms of their level of quality and how great they are. Now, these episodes that are particularly great about the show, I think are right up there with some of the best, if not the best, of Star Trek just in general. But also, they stand out a hell of a lot more compared to some of the lows that this series has. So the top 10 list was pretty easy in my book, though I think I probably will have a couple contentious picks for a lot of you out there. So with that said, let's start right at the bottom with number 10, Stratagem. This episode, I think, highlights probably what I love most about the Xindi arc within Star Trek Enterprise's Season 3. While the Xindi arc didn't necessarily always work on every single level, the episodes that did work within it were the ones that really wrestled with the moral complexity of what Archer and crew had to do. Because Archer and crew had to try eventually save the entirety of not only humanity from being genocided, but as we later learned through the weird temporal war stuff, the entirety of humanity's future, given that we knew that the Federation could possibly be wiped out of existence due to everything. So as a result of that, the crew of the NX-01 had to make some morally dubious decisions sometimes in order to get done what they needed to get done. And I love this sort of wrestling with the more imperfect humanity of the era of Enterprise as compared to, like, the Next Generation, where we would have had Picard probably never lose any sight of his morals. Here, Archer sometimes was willing to do that. And in this episode's Stratagem, it really focused in on that because essentially we have Archer pretending to be the friend of the creator of the Xindi weapon, Degra, and trying to manipulate him into giving them the location of where the Xindi weapon was. And it's honestly kind of fucked up once we see what they're trying to do in order to manipulate Degra. And I think that the episode just really kind of wonderfully handles the moral complexity of that and doesn't really let Archer off the hook for being kind of messed up in his decision to do this.
Subspace turbulence.
Really? I'm curious, Jonathan. If we've been friends for as long as you say, I must have told you the names of my children.
You still don't believe me, do you?
There's something in his hand.
Sure, I would have told you.
Magnify.
It's been years since you've said anything. It's painful.
Captain, he has a weapon.
Number 9, SHUTTLEPOD 1. While a lot of people complained about early Star Trek Enterprise being not that great until it finally hit Season 3 of the Xindi arc, I will argue that there are some truly standout episodes of the first 2 seasons of Enterprise, and SHUTTLEPOD 1 is clearly one of the highlights. This is a great double-hander between Trip and Reed, and honestly was the first time where these two really stood out as their own unique characters. While Reed sometimes gets sidelined in terms of people talking about the show overall, but we get to see here that while he is sort of a closed-off, very private person, he is someone who actually has a lot of heart to him. He actually has a lot of emotion and almost a romanticism to him. But he also is sometimes a little bit more pragmatic than Trip. Trip being a much more sort of hopeful, optimistic guy who always tries to hope for the best that they may get saved and rescued. And so for the two of them to sort of bounce off of each other in their sort of views of possibly getting saved is just really wonderful to see, and honestly goes to show like the bromance that these two eventually kind of build throughout the early seasons of Enterprise. So just a great double handler on that front. But what I also really love about this sort of bottle episode show is that it comes out of a misunderstanding that never probably would have happened in something like the Next Generation. Like in Next Generation, you could easily have just signaled and sent out a signal and communicate with the Enterprise at any time, so they never would have been put in this situation. But here, because we are so early, the danger is very, very real. They only have a limited amount of air. And so I just liked the fact that this is a situation in a story that could have only been told on Enterprise, and did such a great way exploring two characters who had up to this point had not been fully fleshed out.
But with the crew of the Enterprise, it was different. I was really starting to feel comfortable with them. And now the only one that's left thinks I'm the bloody angel of death.
Number 8, Similitude. This is another episode that kind of fits into what I was talking about before with the positives of the Xindi arc, in that it was wrestling a lot with the moral complexity of the situation that they were in. And on top of that, too, this episode is essentially Tuvix 2.0. Like, they're redoing the same basic idea of Tuvix from Star Trek Voyager, and yet, unlike Tuvix, which I do think is a good episode overall, this one I think handles it a little bit better, mostly because it tweaks the situation just enough to make the moral complexity and the sort of ideas that it's trying to get at become a little bit clearer. Because in Tuvix, one of the biggest problems with it was that the practicality of the situation that Voyager was in was never really addressed. Like, Voyager was out in the Delta Quadrant, and so there could be a very pragmatic argument to make that Janeway says, I need 2 people, not 1, and while it sucks to kill Tuvix, I need these 2 people because I only have so many crew members to go around in this situation. But the show never really dealt with that, and ultimately kind of missed the situation that was going on with Voyager that I think could have added a lot of complexity to that situation. Whereas here in Enterprise, they are in this Xindi War situation, so there's an element of like, I need to kill you, I need to kill this person in order to save my chief engineer, because my chief engineer is required for this mission, and while it sucks that I have to kill you, you have a right to be seen as a person. This is the situation that we're dealt, and it sucks. It's not morally correct, but it is the situation we're in. And I think that complexity into this episode really helps as well. But on top of that, it also directly confronts Archer because he chose to make this clone of Trip in order to harvest organs from him. Whereas Tuvix was an accident, here it is placed directly upon Archer, and so we are much more able to have a clearer, firmer grip of the moral center of this episode, as opposed to Tuvix, where it's a little bit more nebulous and why people get more upset at Janeway because it is so debatable in that situation. Whereas here it's like, no, what Archer did is fucked up, but the situation was the situation. And is it right? I don't know, but it is what had to be done in this situation. And that's not saying that letting Archer off the hook for it. It is fucked up, but it is, I think, a little bit more straightforward. And for that, I think it makes it work a little bit better as the episode goes on.
I don't have to tell you what's at stake. I must complete this mission. And to do that, I need Trip. Trip! I'll take whatever steps necessary to save him.
Even if it means killing me.
Even if it means killing you.
Number 7, In a Mirror Darkly. This 2-parter is just a hell of a lot of fun, and I think it just is a great, just fun time for the crew of the Enterprise. You can clearly tell that every actor is just relishing their time to get to play their over-the-top fascist selves in the Mirror Universe. One of my particular favorite stories is that Connor Trenier was asked to just do a pirate accent for his character and just thought like, okay, I'll do it in one take and then I won't do it for the rest. But then they moved on after they shot that, so he was stuck doing the weird pirate voice for his version of the character for the rest of the episodes, which he was so frustrated by. It's kind of funny. So the first episode of this 2-parter is just a great, like, fun look at the Mirror Universe in this time period. But then the second episode was just really cool, nostalgia fun, like getting to recreate the original bridge of the TOS Enterprise, or the Defiant in this case, and just seeing our crew back in the classic universe forms, but in a weird, messed up Mirror Universe way, was just really cool. And actually building out not only the lore of the Mirror Universe, but solving a big mystery from the original series with the Tholian web. This 2-parter is just a hell of a lot of fun. I deeply enjoy it, and it's just a good time.
You're speaking with Empress Sato. Prepare to receive instructions.
Number 6, The Forge, Awakening, and KIR'SHARA. So a lot was made about the Vulcans in the early episodes of Star Trek Enterprise because a lot of people were like, oh, the Vulcans are assholes in this. Why would you ever do that? Without really realizing that, like, this is a pre-Federation Vulcan society. Like, of course, they're going to be a little bit different. And I never had a problem with how the Vulcans were depicted in early season of Enterprise, but this 3-parter episode, I think, just did a great job addressing not only that criticism, but really showcasing, like, what made Star Trek Enterprise unique and really took full advantage of Enterprise by showcasing, like, the evolution of Vulcan culture and Vulcan society in a way that we couldn't really explore in the original series, Next Generation, and beyond. To this day, these 3 episodes are probably the best and deepest exploration into Vulcan culture that we have gotten outside of, like, maybe Amok Time. So for that, this was just a great dive into what makes Enterprise special, but also what makes Vulcan special, and I think it was just a really great 3-parter.
You may be witnessing the start of a new era, not only for Vulcan, but for Earth as well.
The minister intends to pursue a less aggressive policy toward your people. The High Command will be dissolved.
You'll no longer have us looking over your shoulder. It's time for Earth to stand on its own.
Number 5, Carbon Creek. Speaking of Vulcans, though, this is, again, another just kind of, like, fun episode where we get to see Vulcans living in 1940s Earth and just trying their best to get along and just, like, watching I Love Lucy and trying to get back into space. It's just a fun little story that, you know, it doesn't really have a lot of consequence, but it was just a little bit of fun. And Jolene Blalock also getting to showcase her talents here was also great. You know, a lot of people at the time did not give Jolene Blalock her credit, considering that she was just seen as, like, the tits and ass on the show, and was a new actor as well. Like, this, I think this was her first or second acting job. So she wasn't given a lot of credit, but honestly, Jolene Blalock is probably, to my mind, one of the best, if not the best performer of all of Enterprise, and she really comes into her own. So giving her episodes like this where she gets to be highlighted just showcases how fantastic she nailed playing a Vulcan. And it's just a fun little episode.
There's so much to see.
The High Command will never allow it. Tell him it's not possible. Tamir?
Perhaps I can arrange for you to be on the next survey ship.
In another 20 years, running more statistical scans from high orbit? That's not enough.
Number 4, Regeneration. Regeneration managed to make the Borg scary again. Like, this episode is absolutely terrifying, and that is definitely saying something after how much the Borg had been overused back in Star Trek Voyager. I don't hate a lot of the Borg episodes in Voyager as many other people do, outside of Unimatrix Zero. That episode sucks, but other than that, I actually generally enjoy how the Borg were used in Voyager, but you have to be honest, they weren't really that scary throughout much of that show, especially towards the end. But this episode, Regeneration, not only took the Borg back to their roots, but really showcased how terrifying they could be and how even 1 or 2 Borg could be a devastating threat to everybody, and just showcased how the NX-01 crew were in over their heads with this. And it is just a front to back, just well-paced thriller. And on top of that, they also have some really cool, like, playing with different types of horror. Like, we do get the, like, over-the-top, like, eldritch threat that the Borg are later on in the episode, but you also get, like, a kind of a Thing vibe, like John Carpenter's The Thing in the early scenes of the episode. Just really, really great. This is a fantastic front-to-back thrill ride. Yes, the Borg Queen in Star Trek Picard Season 2 has her moments, and I do really like Annie Wersching's portrayal of the Borg Queen, even though I don't love that season as a whole. But for my money, this is the last time that the Borg really felt like a threat, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Did you learn where the message was sent?
Somewhere deep in the Delta Quadrant.
Then I doubt there's any immediate danger. It would take at least 200 years for a subspace message to reach the Delta Quadrant, assuming it's received at all.
Sounds to me like we've only postponed the invasion until what? The 24th century.
Number 3, damage. Yet again, we have another episode in the Xindi arc that I like for very similar reasons to the other two, in that it is dealing with the moral complexities of the situation that they are in. Again, we're not made to like Archer in this episode, but his choice here to steal an element of another person's ship in order to continue his mission because he needs to stop a literal genocide of his people, I think is just showcasing the desperation that the crew was in. And again, kind of does what I wish those like Star Trek Voyager had done with their situation. And I love the pushback and building off of the relationship that Archer and T'Pol have with each other, with T'Pol really just also being pulled to her wit's end as well, like being frustrated with Archer, also dealing with her own stuff going on with, I think it's, Trillium D? I forget the drug that she was taking that giving her emotions, but like the drug addiction stuff that she was going through, like all the character arcs, all the moral, like degradation that we've seen throughout our characters this season all comes to a head in this episode, and it is truly a standout one for the entirety of the series.
We're gonna leave them a supply of Trillium, along with some extra food. I'm not saying it'll be easy for them, but they'll stand a decent chance of making it home.
You're forgetting that we're in a dangerous region of space. Our assault could cripple their ability to defend themselves.
Not if we do it right.
And what if something goes wrong?
We can debate this all day. I've made my decision.
We can't save humanity without holding on to what makes us human. Those were your words to me.
I'm no happier doing this than you are. But we're not gonna make a habit of it.
Once you rationalize the first misstep, it's easy to fall into a pattern of behavior.
I'm not rationalizing anything. I know full well what I'm doing.
I can't justify this course of action.
We don't have a choice.
I won't let you do it!
Number 2, Babel 1, United, and the AENAR. For me, this three-parter showcases what I really would have hoped Enterprise would have continued to do if it had gotten a season 5, 6, and 7. These episodes just showcase the Federation finally coming together and what Archer was hopefully going to become as like a symbol of this early pre-Federation days. And it just really highlighted what the prequel setting for Enterprise could have done. We really got to see the Andorians, the Tellarites, all sort of building up this alliance together to make what we ultimately knew would become the Federation, this better version of the universe that we could make by believing in the betterment of each other. And then also having the Romulans be built up as the threat, building up to the potential Romulan war that we might have gotten to see in the show as well, and having them be sort of instigators trying to drive a wedge between all of our sides and push us against each other, I think also, again, highlights the themes of Star Trek, where it's like, we're better, stronger together if we don't let other people instill fear and distrust within us, but come together and stronger together. I just really adore this three-parter because it just highlights everything that I love about Star Trek and Enterprise in particular, and I just wish we had gotten more of Enterprise just to see more of what this storyline could have become. Also, these episodes fleshed out Andorians, and Andorians are probably my favorite aliens in all of Star Trek, almost in particular because of these episodes, and I'm really glad that we get to see a little bit of stuff from this episode, like the AENAR coming back in Star Trek Strange New Worlds with characters like Hemmer over on that show, so just fantastic in my opinion.
One of the Tellarite ships was hit. An Andorian warship rescued the crew.
So, it's still out there. As you said, a common threat.
I believe we have more to discuss than trade disputes.
But that being said, before we get to my number 1, here are some of my honorable mentions that did not make my top 10 list, but I almost considered putting on there. Judgment, Ceasefire, The Andorian Incident, 0 Hour, Twilight, Detained, Borderland, Cold Station 12, and The Augments. That being said, let's get back to positives because we have reached my number 1 of Star Trek Enterprise, and that is Demons and Terra Prime. Ah, yes, the great series finale to Star Trek Enterprise. I am so glad that this show went out on this episode and that there was no other episodes after this that ruined or besmirched the finale, because while this show got canceled ahead of its time, it did go out on such a high note with Terra Prime. Alright, jokes aside, we all know These Are the Voyages is particularly awful, but for me, Terra Prime, I think, works really well as a finale to Star Trek Enterprise, and I think it just hits at all the things that I think Star Trek Enterprise was trying to show. We have a nationalistic group that is very xenophobic and want to be very pro-Earth, Earth-centric first, lashing out and almost preventing the beginnings of the Federation. And it's, again, highlighting this idea of what only Enterprise could. This humanity before we reach that sort of idea of being better and pursuing our better selves, and sometimes not being able to see past our own prejudices and fear of joining the wider galaxy, but ultimately overcoming that, overcoming our fear and our prejudice to create something greater. And Archer's final speech in this episode is honestly probably one of my favorite speeches in all of Star Trek. And I think Demons and Terra Prime highlights everything that I love about Enterprise, and I think what makes this show special, despite its flaws. In fact, sometimes even because of its flaws. Enterprise, I think, is a special show, and Terra Prime and Demons just highlights all of that. And while was not the series finale, was the great ending to this show that it deserved.
The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other. The final frontier begins in this hall. Let's explore it together.
But that is my list for all the best Star Trek Enterprise episodes. But what do you think about Star Trek Enterprise? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you agree with my top 10 list or not? Also, I'm just going to let all of you know, I filmed all of these top 10 list videos before I had my surgery in early June. But next week, where I will be giving the top 10 episodes of modern Star Trek, I will be filming after my surgery. So you'll get to see my brand new face starting next week. So be ready for that. So this is the last one that this is actually the last video that I'm filming at all before my surgery. So I hope I didn't die. If I'm still alive after that surgery. But thank you for all your well wishes that you've probably given me throughout this series. I'm very much looking forward to this surgery. I'm very much looking forward to giving you my top 10 modern Star Trek episodes after this. But beyond all of that, I love all of you. Mwah. Thank you for being wonderful and supportive, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.